Thank you. So think about the last time that you made something. Could have been anything that you made. Could have been making breakfast, but it could have been making a lesson plan, writing some code, doing some woodworking, whatever you do. Think about the last time that you made something, and ask yourself, did you learn anything when you did that? Did you learn anything from doing that? I mean, maybe you learned something consciously. Maybe you just developed better muscle memory. I don't know. But you learn something from doing it. Everything that we do as human beings, we learn something from doing it. There's a part of us that's always watching what's going on in the world, so we can learn from that, and watching us to see what we're doing and learning from that. Because of this, the next time you were to go down that road and redesign the lesson plan or think about why the students couldn't finish that test that only took you 10 minutes to do, you might think there's a better way to do it, and you might improve on it, and that's great. And what that means is everything that people make is in this perpetual state of being imperfect. And because of that, the consequence of that matters for today's talk is perfect security is impossible. It's not going to happen. Perfect security is impossible. So given that people are going to compromise these systems, they're going to break in, bad things are going to happen, the next obvious question is, what now? And that question is resilience. Resilience is really critical. Those are the two things. Perfect security is impossible, and resiliency is critical. Those are the two things in my talk. So I could be done right now. But I've been an academic long enough not to do that. Instead, what I'll do now is go ahead and elaborate with 60 or 70 or so slides. So there we go. But that's it. Keep those two things in mind. So one thing we might ask, I'm a cybersecurity professional, or so they tell me. How is cybersecurity doing? Is the world getting more secure? Well, there's different ways we can answer that question. Let's see if I can make this work. I may have to drag this to another screen to make it go. Oh, I may be in trouble on not being on EduRoam. There we go. So one way to do this is to look at how well cybersecurity is doing out in the, which side is it? There it is. In the public sector. Let's see if we can make this load, because this is really fun if we can do it.
Looks like you've been hacked.
I probably have been. I'm having a hard time joining EduRoam today for some reason. Maybe it's the concrete bunker that is the place around us. Oh well. Anyway, we'll do without that. It's going to show you, there's a great little, that little URL there will take you to a great visualization of data breaches. So if you're curious about how many people are affected and how they get in and these sorts of things, that's a great visualization. It's interactive. It lets you roll over and find out the stories about them.
And whenever you go to our website, you can get on this video and you'll see it.
You can do that too. And the lesson is there's more of these and they're more impactful, right? Millions of people, in one case over 1 billion records, can get lost in these data breaches. Given that looks bad, and that the news is just a good long stream of these stories about compromise, here's my takeaway on that. Security is getting better. We're doing better. Now, I know this may seem counterintuitive, but I'm going to back it up with the data. I'm going to prove my point, okay? Data is important. I'm going to go back a couple years. 2015, detection of vulnerabilities was hard and slow. It's a little dark, hard to see. But this little circle here, this little donut, shows you when there was a breach at your organization, for this side, somebody outside the organization informed you that you'd been breached. You didn't figure it out. You were blissfully going along, doing your work, and then someone came along and said, hey, something's wrong. We think you've been breached. This side is you figuring it out yourself, right? You're a professional IT people saying a bad thing has happened. Clearly better if you figure it out yourself than if you have to be told by someone else. 47%, less than half of those are over here, 53% over here, and that's better. It may be a breach right now. 53 is down from 69% the year before. 2 out of 3 times someone had to tell you. Now you're getting close to half. How long does it take to find out? On average, it took 146 days to find out that someone had broken into your network. So The good news was they only had 146 days to play around in your network and steal your data. Because before that, the previous year, they had 205 days on average. So numbers are getting better. Let's go to the next year. Here's the most recent one. This is for 2016, the most recent completed year for which we have data. And we see, great, now the external notifications is gone down to below 50%, and internal detection has gone above 50%. So that either means we're doing a lot better at detecting this stuff, or we're doing a lot worse. One of those two things must be the case, right? So we're detecting them internally more often, and we're detecting them faster as best we can tell. So 320, 56, and 146 were the numbers before. This is way down now, only 104 days. Great. Only 99 when someone outside the organization tells you. So we're doing a lot better. You're catching them now. It's mere months that they have to operate in your network unrestricted and steal your data. That's great news, right? That's great news. We're getting that number down. It is depressing that this is in terms of days, but we're doing better. And God bless America, we have the lowest numbers for any of the places they surveyed. So that's great, which means other countries are significantly worse. All right, so one thing you might take away from this is you might ask the question, well, why hasn't Oak Ridge solved this? You've got a chief cybersecurity research scientist, you've got 35 or so people working on this, you've got students working on it, you've got resources, our tax money. Why haven't you solved this problem? Why is this problem hard? Is this problem hard? Well, there are different answers to this. The answer that's most commonly given is it's hard because cybersecurity is asymmetric. I've got to defend everything all the time, and this guy right here only has to get in one time by some unscrupulous means, coming in through my fishery and wildlife portal and compromising my data. So that's one answer, but I don't think that's a good answer. I don't like that answer, because I don't think it tells me much about what I can do. It just tells me, hey, there's this issue, and it's a fundamental aspect of it. Life's hard, but I need to do things. So I'm going to come up with a few other answers to this question, and I'm going to start by talking a little bit about reliability. The longer stuff's out in the world, the more we expect it to be reliable. We expect version 2, version 3, version 4 of a thing to be more reliable, right? I used to have these pens leak on me. They don't leak on me anymore. Maybe it's because I don't chew on them anymore. But most likely it's because they've gotten better at manufacturing them. And that's true for a lot of things, and we take that for granted. We think of testing these systems, and we think of things like exponential growth and reliability. That's great. We think about the lifetime of something out in the world, and we think the bathtub curve, right? It might fail initially, but if it doesn't fail right out of the gate, it's going to last a long time. At the end of the life, it goes back up. So we know a lot about reliability, and we tend to think that things get better over time, and that is the opposite for security. Security of systems decays. The longer something is out there, the more reason you have to suspect it of being insecure, because the longer your adversaries have had to study it, the longer people have had to find vulnerabilities in it, and the more likely there is to be some unpatched thing that maybe you've known about for a while that someone's going to exploit. And version 2, version 3, version 4, they go through the same vulnerability cycle as everything else, and so things can get kind of bad. That blurry picture there is a picture of a Commodore 64 that today is running a automotive repair shop. It's great because it's sort of the opposite end of this. It's a very old system, but it's not networked. So it's pretty secure. All right. So I say it decays. I'm going to give you a few examples of that. Some of you may know about the Heartbleed vulnerability, found in 2012. Didn't get patched until didn't get discovered until 2014. Was rapidly patched. Probably a lot of systems were patched by 2015. So it was out there for a long time. People knew about it, but it took a long time to get these systems fixed. So another one that's fun, more recently, crack. Wireless, Wi-Fi. You're operating a vulnerable Wi-Fi server right now. I can almost guarantee it. Your IT department has not patched it because the flaw in this is in the protocol that is implemented by the routers. It's in there. It's in WPA2, which is the protocol. Came out in 2006. It was discovered last year. It didn't really get much publicity until this year. So if you think that we found it this year, you're way off. We've known about it for a while. We've known about it since 2016. So it's been out there for a good long time. But my favorite one is shell shock. Shell shock is a vulnerability that you take over a computer using the bash shell. So it's a vulnerability against Linux and Unix. And it's been around since September of 1989. It's been around a long time. It's been around longer than probably some people at this university have been around. So, and finally discovered in 2014 and got corrected. So it's out there for a long time. Vulnerabilities doesn't have a long life. I'm going to pick on one from 2010. In 2010, in June 4th, Adobe said, hey, there's a vulnerability in Flash. I know some of you who know about Flash are probably shocked, but or know about Adobe, it's a little bit shocked. But June 4th said, hey, there's a vulnerability. They issued an advisory, and then they said, you know what, this is so serious. We're going to push up our update schedule and fix it. You can count on us. We're going to push up our update. By June 10th, it hadn't been updated, but Metasploit had updated their software. So Metasploit is an open source package so that you can read about the vulnerability and say, well, this field is too long and it contains this kind of data and you do it in this way. And I don't want to write code to do that. Can't someone do it for me? Yes, they can, and they have, and it's called Metasploit. So you go get Metasploit, and there's now a reliable public exploit in Metasploit. So if you can work a web browser and follow instructions on a YouTube video, from this point, you can exploit that bug. So known to the whole world back here, widely exploitable right here. So great. What happens next? Well, Symantec takes a look at this. They're looking in their database of malware. And we got this big database of malware. And we have one at CERT. Everybody has one. And it's hard to know what's in it. Some of the stuff's obfuscated. You just throw the stuff in there, and you're going to use it later. And so Symantec's digging around in it, looking for anything that might look like that. And they find it. And they find out people have been using this vulnerability since 2008. So I'm going to change the scale a little bit, correct the scale some. There we go, that's better. And so sometime in 2008, not sure exactly when, somebody figured this out, and they began including it in malware. They began using it in malware. And so all of 2000, rest of 2008, 2009, into 2010, about half of 2010, and we arrive here where the rest of the world knows about it. So this is your 0-day. You ever heard about 0-day exploits? That's what that is. That's what it looks like. And it can be much longer, right? Shell shock, much, much longer. It's great. How'd the story end? Adobe issues a patch. So they finally update it in their rapidly accelerated update cycle on June 29th. So for all this time, somebody was using it. And for this time, people could exploit it. But if you're not a programmer, great news. Anybody who can download a file and follow the instructions on a YouTube video can use it for this period. And that's how a lot of these unfold. This is just a typical one. So what's going on here? What's happening here? Well, security is a little different from a lot of other properties of these systems. One is the attacks are systematic and they're not random. And we tend to design things to withstand a random attack. And I'll give you a really good example of that a little bit later on, where we have a system that's resilient against randomness, but not resilient against people systematically attacking it. Security is invisible, and it's hard to measure. It's just the fact of reality. Is this computer compromised? I don't think it is, but there's not a flashing red light that tells me. I don't know for sure. And if you've ever found malware on your computer, how did you find it? Did you get an alert suddenly? Did you find it by accident? Did it just seem to get slow? What happened? It's invisible and it's hard to measure. Security is highly contextual. That'll be another theme of this. It's a property of systems. Every system has its own problem. And when I take two systems that I believe are secure and I plug them together, the result might not be secure. There's an example, the plates example. So let's say I have two restaurants. They operate side by side in a mall. And the job of the people back in the kitchen is to be sure that you get a clean plate. And in restaurant A, they do that by cleaning every plate as soon as it comes back to the dish room. They make a stack of clean plates. When your food's ready, they grab a plate off the top of that, put it on a clean plate, and send it out. In restaurant B, they don't do that. I think that's too much time up front. They clean your plate just in time. So your order's ready, they grab a dirty plate off the stack, and they clean it really good, and they put your food on the clean plate and send it out, and both achieve their end. Now, one of them gets bought by the other, and they decide we're going to knock down that wall between the restaurants, and we're just going to be one big happy family. And so they do that, they combine the staff, and when someone reaches for a plate, do they grab a clean plate off the stack or a dirty plate off the stack? Do they know what happens? Right? You've now broken a lot of assumptions. You've combined two secure systems and developed an insecure system. And this happens all the time in practice. It's a composition problem, and it's unsolved. Security is often binary. We like things that are in a continuous spectrum, right? The car is mostly running. I can probably get to the service station with it, so I'm going to drive it there. Security, they've broken in. It's all over, right? They're exporting our data right now. And security is an assumed property. People like to believe that it's true. So going back to that systematic and not random, I'm going to talk about a little bit of computer architecture. DRAM, dynamic random access memory. It's based on a little capacitor here, a little storage capacitor here. And I can put a little bit of charge in there, and that holds a 1, or I can deplete the charge, and it holds a 0. And in reality, I think it's the reverse of that. So, so I can do that, and I arrange these guys in rows. I arrange the rows in banks, and I am able to build that little thing up there and store memory. And like most things, it has the potential for error. This little capacitor can deplete over time, and so it's refreshed. I have a 3.3 volt line on the machine that I strobe periodically, and I put a little more current back into it and keep those things topped up. When the power goes off, that's when I lose the memory. Well, maybe that little idea that there could be a random error, maybe I can exploit that. How can I exploit this randomness? Well, what about I repeatedly write to a row as fast as I can? If I can do that, maybe I can get an error to occur in that row. I'm writing to it, writing to it, writing to it, writing to it. But it's pretty resilient against that. It's designed to be resilient against that. Errors are designed to be very rare occurrences. Okay, fine. But I know something about how the memory is laid out. So maybe what I can do is I can write as fast as I can to adjacent rows and hope that there's a little bit of a bleed current or so forth that gets in there and messes that up. And that's a much more reliable way to induce an error. Great. Now I can cause a random error in memory. Does that help me? Turns out it does. Turns out it absolutely helps me. There's code online to do it. That's the assembly code that can execute this. You can find lots of other code that does it. If I can fill memory with an important structure, and I can in most OSs, and I can cause an error in it, maybe I can change a pointer to something that you care about that should be protected, but that I now have access to. And in fact, people have been doing that for a while now. There's lots of examples of it. And you can root Android phones with this. There's actually an app you can download off the App Store to do this. People have used this to escape from the Google builds Chrome. Chrome has this internal protection. You can get out of that. You can get out of the browser, and you can get out of the OS and own the computer. People have done this through JavaScript. Yes?
Similar attacks to that, if it was a server with ECC memory on it, do you think, does that give it extra protection, or does it eventually succumb?
ECC memory is susceptible to this too. It helps some, but it's still susceptible to these attacks. There's lots of things that people have tried that can help a lot on this. And there are actually, funny thing is, before this attack even became public, there were patents submitted on a way to protect against rowhammer. But that's a whole other talk that I occasionally give. So people knew about it. They just weren't doing anything about it because it's random errors. It's random errors. Low probability of occurrence, right? Not a threat. But that highlights the idea that it's systems all the way down and all the way up. If I can exploit the software and get what I want, that's great. I'll do that. Life's good. That's fine. If I can exploit the hardware underlying it, sure, great. I can do that. I'll plug in a USB key, or I'll use Rowhammer, or I'll do some other perverse things with it. Great. Maybe I can exploit the person sitting at the computer. That's maybe the most reliable way to get in. Or maybe I can exploit the policies around it. And there's a good example of that. I took the slide out because it takes too long for me to talk through it. But there's a good example of a reporter who had his information stolen because some folks called up Google. They wanted to add a credit card, or called up Amazon. They wanted to add a credit card to his account. Amazon let them add a new credit card to his account. Based on having that information, they called up another company and they used the credit card to verify them. Then they were able to get a little bit of information, and they were able to trade that until finally they were able to get a hold of his Twitter account and compromise that. And along the way, they did a lot of other stuff. So you can exploit policies and procedures as well. I take a secure system, maybe a perfectly secure system in some ideal world, and then I embed it in the middle of people and processes, and now suddenly it can become insecure. So it takes it back to my original theme. Perfect security is impossible. Hopefully you believe that. So let's talk briefly about the Internet of Things, moving toward vehicles. The Internet of Things, we're gonna do lots of stuff. We connect lots of things to the Internet, and there are consequences of this. And one of the things that I like to point out is exotic devices create exotic problems. When I begin to add this software and these fancy systems, I can create situations that can be really bad. The image there is from an article in The Guardian about Air France Flight 447, where not two, but three very experienced pilots flew a perfectly functioning airplane directly into the ocean and killed everybody on board. And they did this because the automated flight systems got confused. And they said, I don't know what's going on, right? They were up at altitude, a pitot tube froze up, I think, and the plane said, I don't know what's going on, you fly the plane. And all of a sudden, they had to fly the plane. And they were like, oh, we're losing altitude, something's wrong, we're losing altitude, something's not right. And so they began to pull back. Well, the plane systems recovered, and they said, this is bad, you're in a stall. And so you hear that if you listen to the flight data flight recorders, they say, stall, stall, stall. And so how did the pilots respond to the stall? Did they push the yoke forward? They tried that once, but then they got panicked about it and continued to pull it back, continued to stall the airplane until they crashed it into the ocean. Very tragic. But suppose you're in your self-driving car, it's going down the road at 75 miles per hour, following another car is behind you, and it gets confused. There's some fog, or there's reflections, or something else happens, and it says, I don't know what's going on, you drive the car. How fast are you going to respond? Well, it's going to take you at least 3 milliseconds to realize that you're supposed to be driving the car. And it's going to take you longer to form a picture of what's going on. It takes you over a second to develop situational awareness. Then you got to take over and drive. So that can be a problem. Every device creates its own new opportunity for human error. Okay? So I like this little video. Auto braking system demonstration. So these automated systems are amazing. They can save a lot of lives. And this is a demonstration of an automated braking system in Volvo. Everybody's out, ready to take a video of it. There we go. Everybody's okay. And there is a lesson here. And the lesson here is that these systems only work when they are turned on. So, there you go. These systems only work when they're turned on. You have to think about the fact that a human is in the loop. So as best I can identify them, here are what I think of as the principles of the Internet of Things. 1, instrument all the things. if there's something going on in the world, you're drinking soda, or you're eating lunch, or you're listening to me, and someone is not instrumenting that, not collecting that piece of data, and you realize this, you should run out to a venture capitalist because that's an opportunity, right? All of these, something more, there we go. Unrecorded events are an opportunity to add value. We all want to add value. Share all the things. So I record some information here. It does me no good unless I can combine it with how many steps I walked and what the air temperature was and when I most recently fed my pet. If I can combine all that information, that's great because that enables new applications. And it really does. You can do some amazing things with that. You can learn things that would have been impossible for us to figure out just a few years back because we now have this rich set of data that we can infer stuff from. And connect all the things. This is only going to work if everything is wired up to everything else. There's an example of this. Over in one of our bays at the lab, we have a fairly expensive refrigerator. The refrigerator is the Samsung Family Hub. It's got a big display panel in the door. It runs the Tizen operating system. And it's basically almost like a giant Android tablet in the door of this refrigerator. You can add apps to it. It's got a camera that looks out at you because it might want to see you. And it's got an array of cameras that look in at your food. So that if you are in Kroger or wherever you go and you're like, do I have mayonnaise in my, am I out of mayonnaise? You can look at your phone and look at the inside of your refrigerator and find out. And they're selling these. In fact, they've been advertising them on TV recently. And so we've been looking at the security properties of that operating system. I don't want to malign any companies. I'll just tell you, you can go and Google Tizen and security, and there's many informative talks. Well, not that many, actually. But there's some informative talks on the properties of the Tizen OS. They're putting it on phones and selling them around the world. They're also putting it on stoves. They're putting it on toasters. Everything is going to be connected, right? Because I need my refrigerator to know when the toast pops up. I need that kind of connectivity in my life. And so one of the things we're connecting, one of the things that we said, you know what, instrumenting everything, sharing all that data and connecting everything, that'd be great for automobiles. And so that brings us to automotive cybersecurity. I have good news and I have bad news. I'll give you the good news first. The good news is Scientific American, a respected publication, took a look at this and they said, you know what? Hacking cars is hard. It requires specialized knowledge. It requires specialized equipment. And cars have all this variation in them. So it's hard. In fact, hacking cars is nearly impossible. Your car is not going to get crashed by hackers. They said that in October of 2015. So let's go to January of 2016. Here's your bad news. Your bad news is that all that information, that hard-to-come-by hardware and information, it's all on the web. For $35, you can buy the parts you need, or you can buy the thing already assembled. There are videos, there's explanations. There's the Car Hacker's Handbook. If you decide you'd like a little reading in your bathroom, you can get a printed book to explain to you how to hack your car. It's all easily available. And I'd like to point out a couple of things. So here are some little things that you can build, you can get, and there's web pages that explain. This one you actually just order. There's new versions of this too. This is the roll jam. You see there's a little antenna here, and I think a Raspberry Pi or an Arduino with some stuff on it. And what does this do? This breaks your car's security in that it steals a lock code. So every time you push the button to unlock your car door, it uses a rotating code. So it sends out another code, your little handheld and the car agree on that code, and the locks pop up and life is good. If they don't, then nothing happens. So what this does is it listens for the start of that signal. And the minute it hears it, it jams it. So the car doesn't hear you push that little thing. So what do you do when you push the button and the doors don't unlock? You push it again. That's what, of course. Yeah, push it again. Second time it hears that, it jams it again. And it's recording these. And then it transmits the first one. And so what happens? Well, the car never heard the first one or the second one, so the first one's still the right code. It unlocks all the doors. And so you push the button, the doors unlock, you get in, you drive off, life is good. But the next code is now stored in here. And so after you get out, they can walk up and they can unlock your doors. It's a great system. It's a great system. The one next to it, a little harder to see. It's kind of dark on the screen. But if you've ever, do you know what the OBD2 port is in your car? So if you don't, if you're sitting, driving your car, and you look down, there's usually a little panel or something right here. You can open up. Maybe there's a fuse box back there. And there's a little port back there, a little data port. And your insurance company probably wants you to plug something into that to record your data, and they might lower your rates. They lowered our rates when we did that. So that was great. But that's where you would plug in and get diagnostic information. And when you roll your car into a shop, they might plug in to get diagnostics data off of it. So this little guy was built, custom built for an experiment that said, can I put malware on my car, infect the dealership's diagnostic computer, and use that to infect other computers or other cars? Because that'd be great if I could do that. Wouldn't that'd be great? And so that was the proof of concept they developed for that. Again, it's all out there on the web, right? Everything you need is out there. The resources and the know-how are easily and readily available. So what we think of as the attack surface of the car. All the different ways you can get to what's going on in the car, every way that talks to it. You've got engine control units in here. Those are on something called the CAN bus, soon to be CAN FD by 2020 probably. There's steering and braking, engine control, lighting systems, on and on. There's the tire pressure measurement sensors. Those use RF to communicate wirelessly to the car to tell them what your tire pressure is. There is software on the other end of that. Suppose I craft a really bad TPMS packet. Can I overflow a buffer in that software and get control of part of the car? Maybe. Something to think about. Passive key, all these different things that I can do. Bluetooth is in a lot of vehicles now. Bluetooth has pretty good security. It really does. Modern Bluetooth has pretty good key exchange, pretty solid security, but it's being operated by people. So there's your vulnerability there. If the system asks you to confirm a connection, you're going to confirm a connection. We've learned that over the years. It may have USB. That's a great way to get in. It's certainly got the OBD2 port. That's good. You might plug in something like the automatic thing that you may have seen that lets you read diagnostic codes. It can read from the bus, and it can write to the bus. And it's all one big happy CAN bus in most cars. There's beginning to be a little bit of segmentation, but for the most part, if you can write to the bus, you can slam on the brakes. And your smartphone. Of course, you're going to pair your smartphone with your car, because otherwise, what's the point, right? I mean, you don't listen to the radio. Didn't no one listen to the radio? You didn't hear about this on the radio. Who has listened to a podcast this week? Anyone who listened to a podcast this week? Yes, there we go. Yes, you listen to the podcast. You've got to pair your smartphone to your car to listen to podcasts while you're driving in. And there you go. So there are opportunities on the car itself on the attack surface, but it's all systems, all the way up and down. So another way is, maybe I can't get in the car, but that's okay because I've got a lot of suppliers. These are the tier 1 suppliers of the Mercedes-Benz E-Class. This is showing them off. Tier 1. So they might make some little piece of it. In this case, they make a little component right here, a little sensor, and sell it to Mercedes. But they didn't make all of that. They sourced that from somebody else. They sourced the chips from somewhere, the board. They might even have it assembled on contract for them. They might do nothing except just sell the thing to Mercedes. All of that, nearly all of that in there, has software in it. You'd be shocked at how much stuff has software in it these days. Software everywhere in this thing. They've certainly all got electronic components in them. Those are susceptible. And maybe there's somebody who works there that I can talk with. Maybe somebody who works there isn't being paid what they should be paid, or feels that they're not being paid what they should be paid, or not getting the recognition they deserve. Again, people. People can be an issue. But it's still all systems, so even if it's not the vehicle, I'm going to take that data and I'm going to push it up. Did you all know there's a mandate that all U.S. government vehicles must have telematics? You know about this? Those little dongles that I was mentioning earlier that you could plug in order to connect your car to the wireless network, to the LTE network, and then to the internet. It's being mandated. So the entire federal fleet. So we're going to connect them all, and they're going to put their data up in the cloud. So the position of all these vehicles, that's up there. If I can get into the cloud, I can find out, maybe I can find out where all the state troopers are. Maybe I can actually put some data in there that sends them all somewhere else. Right? So there's lots of issues there as well throughout. But this is all being done by mature companies who understand the market space, who understand the world of vehicles, and they are being careful, they're being conscientious, and they're doing the right thing. But suppose, just hypothetically, suppose you were a company and you think, I would like to expand my market share. What's hot right now? Self-driving cars are hot. Maybe I have a play in the self-driving car space because, you know, I've already sold my video cards to all of the gamers, and I've sold a bunch of video cards to the National Lab for their supercomputers. Who else could use a high-performance video card? Self-driving cars. I could do the computation on this to do the self-driving stuff. So there's Nvidia getting into this space. Lots of people getting into this. Okay, so picked on this enough. Let's think about what Oak Ridge is doing. What can we do at Oak Ridge to help, right? We're here to help. Right? There's the old joke, right? I'm from the government, I'm here to help. And the flip side of that is, I'm from private industry, I'm here for my check. So what are we doing? How are we spending your tax dollars and private companies' money? Well, one thing we've done, and again, sorry for the dark picture, there is the National Transportation Research Center. It's off the main Oak Ridge campus. It's over off Hardin Valley Road out in West Knoxville. And there's two buildings there. A third one is getting ready to open up. So there's building 1, there's building 2, building 3 is going to be over here. Building 3 is going to be all additive manufacturing because one of the things we've done is 3D print a couple cars. Right? And Local Motors is just up the road, and they're going to be 3D printing cars. But here in building 1, we took one of the bays, this little piece of it, and we created a vehicle security lab. We said, you know, if we're going to get into this, we have to realize that the two-wheel dynos we have won't cut it. The vehicle's going to know it's being tested because these vehicles know these wheels are spinning and those aren't. Something's weird. Something weird is happening. I'm being tested. They might be testing my emissions. I'm going to change the fuel mix. I'm not saying that would have happened and been widely reported, but it's certainly a possibility. So we said, you know what, we need a four-wheel dyno. We'll put one in there. And so we created this metrics organization, and we put in a big four-wheel dyno. There's a car sitting on it. We took down we do believe in security. There are rails that go up on either side of this, so you won't put your foot between the moving tire and the roll because that would probably hurt. But we took them down for this glorious picture. But it's a big room. It has good signal isolation. Again, lots of wireless in vehicles, so that can matter. And we've begun doing work. We've been working with Department of Transportation. We've done some pilot studies for them. We've done some vehicle security work, PKI, public key infrastructure, for basic safety messages. We've got done quite a bit of work on that, and our results have been cited in their program reports. And we've resulted in some changes to some specifications. So we're beginning to have an impact. And I'll cover a little more what we do in a few minutes. Well, I can't put a big truck in there. Right? I can't take a UPS truck and put it in there. I can't take a big semi and put it in there. Does that matter? Well, cars, you know, if I want to do something nasty to a car, I've got to figure out what I want to do. And then I've got to figure out how that works. And maybe a certain signal turns on the brakes in that car. But if I go to a different make or a different model or even different trim, that signal might change. And so cars have a little bit of security by obscurity. It's just hard. They get a lot more media attention, but they're kind of harder to attack en masse. Right? It's difficult for me to really cause chaos because I have to have all this additional information. You know what would really help me as a bad guy? If somebody would standardize all that. That would be great. Standards really help the attacker in many ways. And sure enough, heavy trucks and commercial vehicles have a standard, J1939. Now when I want to put the brakes on 100%, I know exactly what signal to send to do that because it's a standard, and they all implement the standard. That's great. It means you can source parts from anywhere and combine them, but it means that they're more vulnerable. You have new attack vectors. All these guys have telematics, so I have to wonder if they're connected to the internet. They are. They're connected. They have to be so that the company can track where they are, how much fuel they're using, how much time that person is spending, driving around lost. Are they going off and doing something else with the vehicle? What's happening? And they potentially have a lot more impact. A big old truck loaded with a whole bunch of anything, a big amount of mass moving at high velocity on a road. Just saying. So how do we test these guys? Well, we have a facility where we can do that. We can't put the whole truck in there, but that's okay. We have a Powertrain Dynamometer. And so it's sort of hard to see it, but we got a little wireframe of a truck over here. This is the power plant for the truck. It's hooked up to a dynamometer right here. And we can apply loads. We can simulate driving conditions. We can simulate loading conditions. We can send it signals. And we can do all kinds of stuff to it. And we can actually visualize the effect of it. So we can do a 3D visualization that shows the truck driving down the road. Don't have to just stare at this thing and wonder, what's going on in that room? It's spinning. But you can actually visualize what's happening to it. And we actually have two of these side by side. So we can do things like have the trucks talk to each other. That's important for things like caravanning, where you want trucks driving close together for long distances. That's going on computer-driven trucks. Caravanning on highways is being tested right now on a stretch of road outside of up in Michigan. Okay. So there we go. Real-world test conditions. So we have all this. What are we doing to protect these systems? So I'm going to try to go from the top down. And so one of the things is lots of data is being collected right now by insurance companies, by DOT, by others. And sometimes this data is exploitable. So one of the things that we've done is we've been given packages of data that have been anonymized. The identifying information has been removed. And let's say the first 5 minutes and the last 5 minutes of every trip have been removed. Great. Now I have no clue who any of these tracks are, except that we're totally able to reverse that and figure out who they all are. We did it on the phone. While on the phone with a sponsor, a fellow named Logan Lamb, who was on our team at the time, he's since moved on, got into the data and using some clever information from open source sources, insurance companies, Carfax, etc. He put it all together, came up with the VIN number and the name of the owner for the track they wanted. You may have seen Logan. He was recently on Samantha Bee, talking about voting machines and how they're vulnerable. He's been on Good Morning America, where he hacked in, where he used his laptop to disable someone's security systems so they could walk into the house without setting it off. Clever, clever guy. So we've been able to do this repeatedly, and so eventually they came back and said, how would you anonymize the data? That's hard, but we have the attack model in mind, and so we asked the question, what do I break this? What information do I need to insert into the data that won't pollute it too much, so it's still useful, but will break that model so that I can't easily reverse it? And we came up with this method, this privacy-preserving data processing, which applies, again, it's hard to see, but applies a forward and backward privacy interval around certain critical parts of the vehicle track to break this up so it's very difficult for us to figure out what's going on. I mentioned vehicle PKI. We're doing that work as well. We've developed what's needed for a large-scale vehicle PKI, about 250 million participants. If anybody in here knows how public key crypto works, that's great. If you know how it works at scale, it's a nightmare. Go over to your IT department here at the university and you're like, yeah, what do you all think about the PKI infrastructure you have here? They will hate it because it's the detestable thing. It's hard to manage. You have to be able to keep these around, revoke credentials when something goes wrong, add new ones, publish new lists. It just becomes quite a bit of overhead. And for 250 million participants, that's huge. And so as we've designed it, we've tried to offload some of that work by having the vehicle be an active participant. The vehicle can generate keys and handle some of this itself. We've gone down to the vehicle and we've asked the question, can I detect when something bad is happening in the car? And this is a publication that should be coming out pretty soon on this. And so the CAN bus is a time-triggered control bus. So there's data, there's information flowing across it, and there's control signal coming across it. And it's all very regimented. If I, as a bad guy, come in and I insert some traffic into there, I might knock something else out of its time slot. And if I'm carefully monitoring the inter-arrival times of packets, I do a little bit of learning. In fact, I do around 5 seconds. I record traffic for about 5 seconds to model the inter-arrival time for this specific car. Then I can detect attacks. And some of them are very noisy, and they're easy to detect. Some of them are very subtle, but we can still detect them because they knock other traffic out of its time slot. And we actually put all this on a little Arduino board. We plugged into that OBD2 port I mentioned, and we've demonstrated this. We've deviled our people there to keep generating more and more subtle ways of attacking the vehicle, and we're still able to detect it. Publication coming out on that pretty soon. The question you might want to ask is, so you detect that my vehicle has been compromised. What now? Right? What now? That's the resilience question. And the answer varies a little bit. If you're law enforcement, maybe knowing that is enough. You can get another vehicle and take it. Maybe I can put the vehicle in a known safe state. Maybe I can throw away part of the vehicle's hardware. I can take a piece of it, take it offline, rewrite this, refresh the software in it so it's back to a stable state, turn it back on. Right? I'm going down the road, I discovered that my entertainment system has been compromised remotely by, let's see, the guys who perpetrated the Jeep hack. I can turn the antenna off, turn the radio off, turn the device off, reflash that stuff, turn it all back on, acquire a new IP address for that, and just keep going down the road the whole time because it's not part of the drivetrain. There's lots of things you can do. I come out of the world of telecom, and a phone switch cannot fail. Can't do it. There are carrier grade requirements. You will be fined if that thing fails. Phone switches can't fail. Well, everything mechanical eventually fails, and software has bugs in it. So what do? Well, what you do is you build the system so that you fail a portion of it and restart that, but keep the entire thing running. We connect these things to power, by the way, with these copper bus bars. It's really ductile copper, and there's no off switch on them. So you can't trip over the cable or hit the off switch by accident. And these things have survived and routed traffic following earthquakes. The building has collapsed on them. So we can do it. It's just difficult. It takes some real engineering. We've looked at how we get keys for the PKI. How do we know this is really the right vehicle? How do we identify it? We've looked at ways of doing that. And the thing we've looked at here are things called physically unclonable functions. This is just something that is super easy to make, but impossible or prohibitively expensive to replicate. And a good example of that is right here. I use standard CMOS techniques, and I make about a 1 millimeter by 1 millimeter guy. And instead of controlling for all of the process, I relax those, and I allow channels to form in the silicon. And now I can use a little photodiode. I can put some light down it. I can measure the response over here. And so I can have an input and output. It's a function. It's very stable. It's very small. You can put it in the package. You control it. And no one else can replicate that easily. And I've got a huge challenge response space. Right? I've got 3 channels there, but you can imagine hundreds of these. Giant space, which I can now map out at the assembly point place and then verify later on that nothing's changed. This is just one way to do it. We've got other ones that involve acoustics, electronic noise, you name it. And then the software itself. So we developed some software that takes in the raw compiled stuff that comes off of a device, or that you get from the people who write the code. We can train you in about a day, if you're a programmer, to write these little behavior specification units that say, I want to look for this behavior in the system. You run our code, you give it the raw stuff, you give it these little things to check for, and it will tell you if it finds them. And it'll tell you where it finds them. It'll tell you these are the bytes, these are the instructions that match this. We use this primarily to find latent malware or sleeper code and stuff. We use it to analyze malware. We used it to analyze the malware that was used to attack the lab back in 2011. It's actually how we came up with this little piece right here. And we've sent it out to a whole bunch of different folks, to DOE's malware analysts, the Air Force Material Command, the Navy, DHS. This was part of their transition to practice program. And it's been licensed. It was licensed by a company. It then got the VCs pressured them to spin it out into its own company, and they went with it. There's a company called Envio, a brand new company here in Knoxville that was started up to commercialize Hyperion. So that's now out the door, and you can analyze that code that's in your car. Okay, so take a amount of time. Leave with this message. Perfect security is impossible, and so resiliency is critical. And we might think about how we get there. Oh man, that's too dark. What it says is 208 persons have drowned kayaking on this lake. The number of them wearing life jackets, 0. 0. Even strong swimmers can die. But we have a solution for that. It's the life jacket. So we have to do a better job of training the workforce, because people are the vulnerability. People are really the vulnerability in a lot of these systems. I can design a great system, and then I can turn it over to somebody who'll give away your passwords. That's just how that works. We have to do better system design, because vulnerabilities are the vulnerability. We can do a better job of not building this stuff in, of making more resilient code. I think we need to do a better job of coordinating our efforts, of sharing information. We don't. Everybody is siloed. There are a lot of attempts to share information. Some of them have done fairly well, some of them not so well. We've been trying within the Department of Energy. If you don't know what the Department of, I used to have to explain what DOE does, but now everybody's seen Stranger Things, and you know. But we want to share information. A lot of those efforts get frustrated because it's difficult to fund something. It's not research. What is this? It's just sort of, am I funding the IT departments of the labs? I don't want to do that. So, but this is critical. We need to do it. And of course, I got to plug research, because that's what I really care about. Thank you. Questions?
So what kind of car do you drive?
I drive a Kia Optima. I bought it for a very specific reason. I can put 3 car seats across the back seat.
What's the safest email they can use?
What now?
Safest email.
That would probably be my DOE email account.
For us.
For you all, that's tough. So my personal email account is a Gmail account with 2-factor authentication turned on. So whenever it gets logged into from a new machine, I get a note saying someone's logging into your email. Do you want to allow this or not? Usually it's me, and I do want to allow it. But in at least one instance, it was not me, and I didn't want to allow it. Turned out to be one of my kids. So I do that because I get notified by it. They have 2-factor authentication, so I actually have a little app that will generate a one-time code that's needed every time I want to log into it again. Seems pretty secure to me. I have a UT email account as well. I almost never use it.
What kind of other mitigations do you take with you through life?
Well, I turn the security on a lot of things. A lot of stuff comes to you with no security turned on. And so I tend to turn that stuff on. I tend to not really install a lot of software unless I have a good reason to install it. And I tend to carefully check. So there's a good analogy. So I tend to check where the software is coming from. Is this seem to be a reputable company? Is this someone who seems like they've done a pretty good job of this? It's sort of like going on eBay and buying something. You go on eBay and you buy something, and maybe you're going to get a box of trash because the people who are selling it are just scamming you. That's a thing that happens really commonly on eBay. So you can check the seller reputation, and if they have a good reputation and lots of good ratings over a long time, you're probably pretty safe. Right? I mean, do I believe these things are all perfectly secure? You know that I don't, right? You know that I believe that this stuff can all be compromised. And so the real question is, how am I going to know, and what am I going to do when inevitably one of my kids installs malware on a computer? Because that's going to happen. And how am I going to know, and what am I going to do about it? So I've got, I know the problems with antivirus software, but actually I don't put any on the Windows machines because Microsoft's gotten so good with what they put on there now that there's not really much of a point. And they use a lot of behavioral hooks to find this stuff. So, you had a question?
I'll take my example of last night. I wanted to go to the symphony concert last night, so I plotted my normal way in my head so I can go park at State Street Garage. But when I get to, well, first thing I had to do was deliver a package to 6608 North Shore Drive. Well, North Shore Drive is a two-lane road, thousands of cars coming at you and going behind you at 6 p.m.
Yeah.
And unless I have some kind of a sensor on the car, other than my eyes, I don't know when I get to 6608 North Shore because I can't see it because the number's not there very well.
Right.
And now I flagged that delivery and just canceled it, and went downtown, and Rick has closed all the streets there that get me to State Street Garage.
Ah.
So I have to put my head in gear and say, well, how can I get around this? So I wound up down at Kessel Garage, which was easy to get to and empty. But I just don't see how you can make
a car navigate all that.
Self-driving with so many variables working in every trip.
Well, so I've talked to some folks who are in this that are very optimistic, and they say, oh, we're going to have self-driving cars all over the roads by 2020. But the people I've talked to who I sort of have the most faith in their estimates tell me that that's very overly ambitious. They think there are still 2 or 3 or 4 or more breakthroughs that we'll have to have before we have widespread adoption of self-driving cars. On the other hand, if you would like to ride in a self-driving car with no one behind the wheel, you can do that today. I think you can do it today in Phoenix, in Phoenix, Arizona.
It's on a very select road.
Yeah, somebody's running I think Google is running a ride-sharing service there. And I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but they're running a ride-sharing service with their self-driving cars. They decided that Phoenix was bland enough and boring enough that you could do it. But I've lived in Pittsburgh prior to this, right? And Pittsburgh, if you've ever been to Pittsburgh, it's all hills. It's all like steep, here's your 60-degree grade right here. It's all covered in ice in the winter. And at least in the city, driving is an approximation, right? Because people stop on the side of the road to deliver packages, so you got to go drive into the lane. People park on that lane, so you got to like weave around a little bit, and you have to cooperate with the other driver and say, I'm going to come through on your lane, and you're going to stop. We're going to agree to that right now because we can see each other, and that's what you do. And so I'm going to do that, and then you'll come through. And it all works out because people are pretty flexible. I throw a whole bunch of crazy new situations at you, and you adapt to it and get through it. Usually. People drive hundreds of millions of hours between accidents. So we're pretty darn reliable.
But don't you think it'll have to be like autopilot on the plane where you turn it on, you turn it off to land?
Yeah.
Would you buy one?
Would I buy a self-driving car? I tell you, every time I take the kids on vacation and we drive all the way down to Orlando, I think to myself, well, I'm on the interstate, I wish I could just turn something on and it would just go. Because, but for right now, no, I wouldn't buy one right now.
Well, it depends. In a very controlled situation, maybe. In the random situation, no.
So I would say, people are buying the Teslas right now and turning their autopilot on. There's videos on the web of people playing Jenga in the Tesla while completely ignoring the road, while it drives down. And there's videos of people sleeping. People have seen people sleeping in these Teslas while and they'll just follow the lanes.
Your presentation was really nicely animated. Lots of these are pretty monotone affairs. You did a
I
great
can be
job.
pretty monotone. I have that. That's in my skill set. It's a pleasure.
Thanks to Dr. Prowell. If you've got more questions, please stay a little bit
Yes.
afterwards. And we are very grateful to you. Thanks.
It's my pleasure.